This is hiphopraisedmetheblog.com, where we celebrate 47 years of the younger genre of music, hip-hop, where it's about the knowledge, the culture, and the lifestyle. My name is C.E.O. Dream, and this is the future of hip-hop journalism. Hip-hop raised me. A century ago, a prosperous black neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma perished at the hands of a violent white mob. The Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921 killed hundreds of residents, burned more than 1,250 homes, and erased years of black success. What the Tulsa Race Massacre destroyed. Imagine a community of great possibilities and prosperity, built by black people for black people. Places to work, places to live, places to learn and shop and play, places to worship. Now imagine it being ravaged by flames. In May 1921, the Tulsa, Oklahoma neighborhood of Greenwood was a fully realized antidote to the racial oppression of the time. Built in the early part of the century in the northern part of the pocket of the city, it was a thriving community of commerce and family life to its roughly 10,000 residents. Brick and wood frame homes dotted the landscape along the blocks lined with grocery stores, hotels, nightclubs, billiard halls, theaters, doctor's offices, and churches. Greenwood was so promising, so vibrant, that it became home to what was known as America's Black Wall Street. But what took years to build was erased in less than 24 hours by racial violence, sending the dead into mass graves and forever altering family trees. Hundreds of Greenwood residents were brutally killed, their homes and businesses wiped out. They were casualties of a furious and heavily armed white mob of looters and arsonists. One factor that drove the violence, resentment towards the black prosperity found in block after block of Greenwood. The financial toll of the massacre is evident in the 1.8 million of property loss claims, 27 million in today's dollars, detailed in 2001 State Commission report. For 2 decades, the report has been one of the most comprehensive accounts to reveal the horrific details of the massacre, among the worst racial terror attacks in the nation's history, as well as the government's culpability. The destruction of property is only one piece of the financial devastation that the massacre brought. Much bigger is the sovereign kind of inheritance, the incalculable and enduring loss of what could have been, and the generational wealth that might have shaped and secured the future of black children and grandchildren. What if we had been allowed to maintain our family businesses? Asked Brenda Nails, Alfred, who was in her early 60s. The Greenwood Avenue shoe shop of her grandfather and his brother was destroyed. If they had been allowed to carry on that legacy, she said, there's no telling where we could be now. For decades, what happened in Greenwood was willfully buried in history, piecing together archival maps and photographs with guidance from historians. The New York Times constructed a 3D model of the Greenwood neighborhood as it was before the destruction. The Times also analyzed census data, city directories, newspaper articles, and survivor tapes and testimonies from that time to show that the types of people who made up the neighborhood and contributed to its vibrancy. The Marquee Block. Perhaps no other collection of businesses tells the story of the Greenwood and black entrepreneurship better than the 100 block of Greenwood Avenue. Rising near the southern tip of this neighborhood, the Marquee Block was the pulse of the black business community, with more than 70 businesses operated in mostly 1, 2, 3 block story brick buildings clustered along the block. All but a couple were owned by the black owners. In this stretch alone, there were 4 hotels, 2 newspapers, 8 doctors, 7 barbers, 9 restaurants, and a half dozen professional offices of real estate agents, dentists, and lawyers. The cabaret and cigar shop were on the block too. You could shop for groceries, play pool, take in the theater, show, eat dinner, or even get your hairstyle without ever leaving the block. My grandfather often talked about how you could enjoy a full life in Greenwood, that everyone you needed to or wanted was in Greenwood. You never had to go anywhere, said Star Williams, 40, the granddaughter of Otis Granville Clark, who was 18 during the massacre. He talked about seeing black success and how his sense of identity and pride came from Greenwood. The businesses of Greenwood Avenue were owned by people who were among Tulsa's most prominent black citizens. Lula and John Williams became the embodied entrepreneur spirit of Greenwood. He owned a confectionery of 102 Greenwood Avenue and East End garage around the corner on Arch Avenue. The couple also owned a 750-seat Williams Dreamland Theater at 129 Greenwood Avenue, the first movie house for black people in the city. It offered both silent films and live shows, and also was a community gathering spot. Dr. R.T. Bridgewater was the physician with the practice in the Woods building at 101-105 Greenwood Avenue. He owned 17 rental houses and was also a community leader. The Tulsa Star, a black-owned newspaper, called his home on the affluent North Detroit Street, palatial. Several women set up shops as entrepreneurs in the same building. Mary E. Jones Parrish left was a teacher and journalist who operated the typing school. Mabel B. Little ran the Little Rose Beauty Salon. Susie Bell ran an upscale restaurant called Bell and Little Cafe with their brother, Presley Little. Miss Little's husband, it offered 6-course meals that were written about the Tulsa Star. Buck Colbert Franklin, a lawyer, had an office inside a building owned by O.W. Gurley, one of Greenwood's founders. After the massacre, Mr. Franklin provided legal services. James Nails, shown here, and his brother Henry ran a shoe shop in the GIST building at 121 Greenwood Avenue. The shop carried Black Swan records, and the family also owned the dance pavilion and skating rink in the community. A.J. Smitherman, a journalist and civil rights activist, founded the Tulsa Star, which was headquartered at 126 Greenwood Avenue. The paper reported on stories of racial violence and advocated for the rights of African Americans. J.B. Stratford, shown with his wife, opened the posh 54-room Stratford Hotel at 301 Greenwood Avenue in 1918. It was considered among the nation's best hotels for African Americans at the time. A city within a city. Mr. Stratford and Mr. Gurley, who purchased large tracts of land in the early 1900s, were among the founders of Greenwood. They began building on the northern side of the Tulsa began beyond the grading railroad tracks, forming the bones of the city's predominantly black neighborhood that was separated from the white side of town. Greenwood was one of the few places in the country offering black citizens less than 6 decades of and out of enslavement, a three-dimensional life. By 1921, Greenwood had grown into a 35-block neighborhood with a bustling retail scene, as well as 2 schools, 2 newspapers, and a hospital. Here, some of the community's key places are shown in orange. Booker T. Washington School, which opened in 1913 with 14 students, had moved into a 3-story brick building in the 1920s and would serve as hospital and relief center after the massacre. Mount Zion Baptist Church was among some half-dozen churches that burned. It was the city's largest black church. There were also a small juke joint called Zulu Lounge, owned by Isaac Evans, who worked by day on a farm, but after dark, flung open the doors of Zulu. In the evenings, residents had their choice of entertainment. Survivor accounts that were relayed to relatives recall neighbors getting pussied up to gather in Greenwood, with Thursdays being big because of Maid's Night Out. Black domestics, many of them live-in workers who cleaned the homes of white residents across the town, were all off that day. Many African Americans migrated to Tulsa after the Civil War, carrying dreams of new chapters and the kind of freedom found in owning businesses. Others made a living working as maids, waiters, chauffeurs, shoe shiners, and cooks for Tulsa's new oil class. And Greenwood residents were held more than 200 different types of jobs. About 40% of the community's residents were professionals or skilled craftspeople, like doctors, pharmacists, carpenters, and hairdressers. According to the Times analysis of the 1920 census, while the vast majority of the neighborhood rented, many residents owned their own home. Segregation kept African Americans from patronizing white-owned shops, and Greenwood thrived from community support of black-owned businesses. Black folks faced an economic detour, said Hannibal B. Johnson, an author and education chair for the 1920 Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission. When they approached the gates to the wider Tulsa economy, they were turned away. So they ended up creating their own largely insular community. The massacre that ended it all. The assaults on Greenwood raged over 2 days. The morning of June 2nd, 1921, revealed emptiness and ruin in every direction. Clumps of smoke hovered over the neighborhood. Ash coated the ground. Brick buildings had been reduced to bombed-out husks, and soon the bodies of those killed would be stacked and discarded in mass graves in the river. It all began on May 30, with 2 teenagers in the elevator at the Drexel building in downtown Tulsa and morphed into a sexual assault accusation. Accounts vary about what happened between Dick Rowland, 19, a young black shoe shiner, and Sarah Page, 17, a white elevator operator. One common theory suggests Mr. Rowland tripped and grabbed onto the arm of Miss Page while trying to catch his fall. She screamed and he ran away, according to the commission report. The next day, Mr. Rowland was arrested and jailed in the Tulsa County Courthouse. By that afternoon, the Tulsa Tribune published a front-page news story with the headline, "Nab Negro for Attacking Girl in Elevator," which essentially mobilized a lynch mob that showed up at the courthouse. Twice, a group of armed black Tulsans, many of them World War I veterans, offered to protect Mr. Rowley, but were turned away by the sheriff. As the black men were leaving the second time, a white man attempted to disarm a black veteran, and the gun went off in a scuffle. That clash and others that day marked the beginning that would become Greenwood's armed destruction. Some white rioters were even deputized and given weapons by civil officials. Near dawn, the white mob descended on Greenwood. Black Tulsans fought back, valiantly defending their families and property, but they were woefully outnumbered. The mob indiscriminately shot black people in the streets. Members of the mob ransacked homes and stole money and jewelry. They set fires, houses by house, block by block, according to commission report. Terror came from the sky too, while pilots flew airplanes that dropped dynamite over the neighborhood. The report stated making the Tulsa aerial attack what historians call among the first of American cities. The numbers presented a staggering portrait of loss. 35 blocks burned to the ground, as many as 300 dead, hundreds injured, 8,000 to 10,000 left homeless, more than 1,470 homes burned or looted, and eventually 6,000 detained in internment camps. The neighborhood economy was destroyed. 24 grocery stores, 31 restaurants, 4 drugstores. Greenwood, where black success embodied the American dream, was no more. And success was suddenly, dreadfully wiped out. What was lost, Greenwood would be rebuilt, and for a few decades it would again thrive before falling into urban renewal and other forces. But that spring of 1921 unmoored and unrooted the neighborhood with lasting effects. Not long after the attack, shell-shocked survivors who were blamed for the violence returned home to ruin. Amid charred remnants, they were forced to make an excruciating decision that would change family histories forever. Leave and start over again somewhere else or rebuild. They also face another kind of white resistance. A fire ordinance intended to prevent black property owners from rebuilding on their own, and insurance companies that refused to pay damage claims. Greenwood wasn't a gift from anyone. It was created by the citizens of Greenwood, who withstood the tragedy of 1921 and rebuilt it again, said Scott Ellsworth, the author of the recent released book, The Groundbreaking, An American City and Its Search for Justice. Greenwood is the story of resilience. It is the story of courage. Those who stayed began stitching their lives back together almost immediately. They joined forces and began rebuilding homes and businesses. Within a day, C.E.O. a massacre survivor and minister whose barbershop at 110 Greenwood Avenue was destroyed, purchased a folding chair, a strop, and a razor, and set up shop on the sidewalk. The massacre also claimed Mount Zion Baptist Church, whose first service in its new building had been held less than 2 months earlier. The congregation's hundreds of members had financed and built the 92,000 church over several years, according to the Black Wall Street, from from riot to renaissance in Tulsa's historic Greenwood district. A book by Mr. Johnson, education chair for the Centennial Commission. It would have been easier to declare bankruptcy. Instead, church members rebuilt and dug in, and it took an additional 21 years before the initial debt was repaid. The final insult of this massacre came in to rest the silence for decades. Tulsa deliberately ignored and covered up what had happened in Greenwood. Many descendants said they learned about the mob and the killings only as adults, and even then some of them recounting was told in whispers. You could see the pain in many grandmothers' eyes when they talked about what happened, said Leroy Gibbs II, 52, the grandson of Ernestine Gibbs, a massacre survivor who was 17 when the violence unfolded. Before she would get too far, before it became too painful, she would shift and start talking about where we are today. Some surviving business owners who built 100 block of Greenwood Avenue had remarkable second chapters. Others who struggled in the aftermath had heartbreaking stories. The Williams family, among the most successful before the massacre, stayed and rebuilt. Mr. Smitherman, a civil rights activist who ran the Tulsa Star, eventually landed in Buffalo, where he became the publisher of the Buffalo Star, later named the Empire Star. He was among the several black Tulsans indicted for inciting a riot and was exonerated posthumously. Mr. Parrish, the journalist who ran a typing school, stayed to chronicle the massacre. The two wealthy men who helped found Greenwood were hit hard financially. Mr. Stratford, who was indicted, escaped to Kansas and then Chicago. He then recovered his fortune. He never recovered his fortune. Mr. Gurley reported lost nearly $1,058,000 in 1921, or $2.3 in today's million dollars. James Nails, who had opened the shoe shop with his brother Henry, rebuilt but never really recovered. He eventually left Tulsa. He was really unable to carry on emotionally, psychologically. Miss Nails' outfit said, you can get your education, you work hard, you start your business, you're able to employ your family members and community members, and then you lose it all within hours. It takes away a man's dignity. There is a pending lawsuit and ongoing discussions about whether to compensate the families of Tulsa massacre victims. No compensation has ever been paid under the court order or by the legislation. To this day, not one person has been prosecuted or punished for the devastation and ruin of the original Greenwood.
This is hiphopraisedmetheblog.com, where we celebrate 47 years of the younger genre of music, hip-hop, where it's about the knowledge, the culture, and the lifestyle. My name is C.E.O. Dream, and this is the future of hip-hop journalism. Hip Hop Raised Me.